Hello everyone and welcome to today's Wild Rift video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 5 of the top champions that you should be playing in Wild Rift patch 6.0a. In patch 6.0, we had the huge durability patch, which increased all of the base health, armor per level and magic resist per level, which was a huge buff to both tanks and mages. But we also had a few tweaks to some champions in patch 6.0, and just 1 week later we had another update, patch 6.0a, which had more tweaks to champions and items. First up in the solo lane, we're going to be talking about one of the tanks that got a huge buff with the durability patch, and that is none other than Malphite. Malphite is a great pick this patch and also a very safe pick as well. He doesn't have a lot of losing matchups in the solo lane as long as you're against at least 3 AD champions, which is quite normal with an AD top laner, an AD jungler and an AD carry. You can easily pick Malphite with his inbuilt armor. He can also keep stacking up this armor as well with his items, giving him more damage from his second ability. And you'll be surprised to know that Malphite right now is actually maxing his second ability first to give him that bonus damage and bonus armor with this ability. He also has great initiation with his ultimate, being able to knock up multiple enemy champions in a team fight. And that is sometimes a struggle in solo queue, having that person on your team that isn't afraid to go in, tank a bunch of damage and be the one to initiate in team fights. And on top of this, with so many bruisers being so strong right now in the jungle, with your attack speed slow that you have on your third ability, this is great against all the bruisers and AD carries that are being picked right now in this meta. And on top of this, you build items like Iceborne Gauntlet, which also gives you that big massive ray of slow. And speaking of items, with Malphite's build, you just want to go for as many tanky items as possible. You don't want to get baited by this AP Malphite build that looks to try and one-shot. Riot has buffed the armor stats and the tank stats of Malphite so much in the past few months that actually you do more damage over time with this tank build rather than going for an AP build. Iceborne Gauntlet on top of your second ability gives you a huge amount of damage and also armor to give you that survivability. Thornmail is there for the anti-heal. Randuin's Omen, even though it did receive a bit of a nerf, is still a very strong item against a lot of critical strike damage. Twin Guard to give you that extra magic resist that you might need and also the extra tankiness when you're in team fights for a long amount of time. And Force of Nature at the end to give you the movement speed to get into range to use your ultimates. Grasp of the Undying being the main rune choice for Malphite, giving you that extra trading and healing during the laning phase, with Nullifying Orb, Second Wind and Overgrowth giving you some more tanky stats. And surprisingly, for our secondary rune, we are going to be going for Brutal, since we are maxing our second ability first. This also gives us a lot of great trading potential in the early stages of the game and gives us a little bit of extra auto attack damage when we get into the mid and the late game. Moving into the jungle, you won't be surprised to see Amumu as my top pick this patch. He was already very strong before the patch 6.0 durability update, but that durability update gave him more stats, and he also got a buff on top of that as well, increasing the damage on his second ability and also increasing the amount of tank stats he gets from his third ability. Amumu is one of the easiest champions to learn. He doesn't have any combos or any complicated abilities in his kit. All his abilities are quite simple and easy to understand, and as long as you hit abilities like your bandage toss and your ultimate, you'll be very useful in a team fight. Not only that, but as I mentioned, he's also very tanky at the same time, with runes like Aftershock every single time that you land a crowd control ability, giving him even more tanky stats. And as long as you're standing around auto attacking champions, your second ability and your third ability is going to give him the damage that he needs to carry in team fights. He also has one of the fastest jungle clear speeds in the game as well. You can fully clear your jungle in around 1 minute and 10 seconds, which is the fastest out of any other jungler in the game, which means you have more time to move around the map, try and look for ganks with abilities like your bandage toss and your ultimate to give your team that lead that you need in the early game. With the build, items like Searing Crown and Sunfire Aegis gives us the damage that we need, with Searing Crown dealing damage over time with our abilities, and Sunfire Aegis dealing more damage over time when we're near enemy champions. And then similarly to Malphite, we're going for items like Twin Guard for the extra tankiness since we'll be in team fights for a long amount of time, Force of Nature to get into range to use abilities like Bandage Toss and our ultimate, and Randuin's Omen as a great critical strike damage reduction item against all of the fed carries on the enemy team. Aftershock is great since when you use Bandage Toss, you fling yourself towards enemy champions, which means you'll be within range to deal the extra damage with Aftershock on top of damage from your third ability and also your second ability. Courage of Colossus also gives us that extra shielding when we're landing crowd control, with Bone Plating and Overgrowth giving us the extra tank stats. And Transcendence as our secondary rune, since this is going to reduce the cooldown of Amumu's first ability Bandage Toss, which is one of the biggest engaged resources that you need with Amumu to start off team fights. For the mid lane, we have Victor. Now, don't be fooled by the recent nerf that happened to Victor in the previous patch, with both the first ability blast damage and empowered base damage both going down, and the third ability damage and also the bonus damage going down. Overall, Victor is still a very safe and sometimes can even win some laning phases thanks to his crazy poking potential with his third ability and first ability, and also the shield he gains from his first ability allows him to easily trade during the early game. And when it gets to the mid and late game, when Victor can upgrade his abilities, especially his third ability, allowing him to get double the amount of damage, the first ability for the extra movement speed, it becomes very difficult to deal with. And there's a crazy synergy right now where you can go for Lich Bane, Empowered Attack, and Shield Bash, which increases his first ability's damage by quite a lot. For the build, Ludens is still a very strong item. However, I do feel like at times you don't really need the mana, since after 13 minutes in the game, everyone gets blue buff for free. So sometimes you'll be able to just run Lich Bane as your first item and just go for full burst damage, with other items such as Death Cam, Awakened Soul Stealer to get the crazy amount of ability haste, and then Crown the Shattered Queen just for that defensive shield. For the runes, First Strike is very strong on Victor right now. His third ability has incredible range to proc in the early game. You can then stack up the amount of gold, and also if you hit your First Strike, you can walk forward, use your first ability, gain that shield, and also allow that ability to deal true damage. And then, as I mentioned, with Shield Bash and Empowered Attack, this increases the damage of your first ability, Eyeball Collector to get the extra stats from getting takedowns, and Bone Plating just in case you get jumped on by any all-in champions. Moving down in the duo lane, our marksman pick for this patch is none other than the tank killer Vayne. Vayne has been struggling now for quite some time to try and fit in the meta, since before patch 6.0 it was all about the assassins, it was all about these squishy champions, and Vayne is a champion that loves to play against tanks because of her true damage from her second ability. But now with everyone with the durability patch, with everyone getting more base health, health per level, base armor per level, and with bruisers and tanks in general becoming a lot more popular, Vayne is able to fit very nicely in this meta. Now, even though Vayne does have a pretty weak early game, the durability patch definitely helps her with her survivability in the early game. Your laning phase is going to be a bit sleeper. You're just going to farm up as much gold as possible. But then when you reach at least 2 items, especially when you get items like Blade the Rune King and Trinity Force, you can become a real playmaker and pretty much 1v1 anyone on the map. One of the main reasons why Vayne is so strong this patch is because of the true damage from her second ability. She's able to shred through all of these bruisers and tanks that build a lot of HP and armor. And also Blade Rune King in general got a bit of a hidden buff, since the passive does damage based on the enemy's current health. So now everyone gets more HP per level, Blade Rune King's damage goes up. And her late game is one of the best late games out of any champion in the game. If you have an enchanter support by your side, like a Yuumi, a Lulu, or even a Milio, she can become a 1v9 queen in the late game. And her mobility with her invisibility, with her ultimate and her first ability makes it so you can reposition in a team fight, you can knock enemies away or even stun enemies against a wall with the third ability. She just becomes one of the best duelists in the game to play. With the build, as I mentioned, Blade Ruin King at the moment being a very strong item with so many tanks and bruisers currently in the meta. Trinity Force, one of the best items in the game, just gives you all around great stats. The Sheen passive works well with her low cooldown on her first ability and gives her the attack damage and attack speed that she needs. Terminus, again, very strong like Blade Ruin King in terms of on-hit items. Your extra damage that you're able to get through Terminus, you can also get the extra armor and magic resist that you need as well. That survivability that you need for Vayne sometimes in the mid and late game will save you from getting one shot. Wit's End for the extra on-hit damage, and then Twin Guard as the final item. Since when you get to this stage of the game, when you have 4 items, you have enough damage in your kit with your true damage. So Twin Guard is there as the survivability item, just to give you the extra armor and magic resist, so you become that late game beast. But the rune's lethal tempo for the extra attack speed is very nice. Brutal actually does more damage now in the late game, which can help Vayne scale and do more auto attack damage. Giant Slayer, again, as I mentioned, against the tanks and the bruisers can deal more damage. Legend Alacrity for the extra attack speed, and then Bone Plating to protect you from any all-in damage. And lastly, for the support role, everyone is hyping up enchanters right now, like Lulu, Yumi, Janna. But for me, the best protective support to play in this meta is actually going to be Braum. Braum is one of the most underrated supports, I feel like, in the game. Even though he doesn't really have a strong rune choice, he has one of the strongest disengage tools in the game with his ultimate. He can block a lot of damage as well with his shielding. His peeling potential, especially with his passive and his first ability, meaning that if you can stack your passive on multiple enemy champions at the same time, you can use this to your advantage and your AD carries can auto attack them to stun targets. But he still has the option to play offensive if he wants to. With his dash on his second ability, being able to dash 2 minions, you can then use this aggressively to try and use your first ability to poke enemy champions, or even try and stack your passive. As I mentioned, the shield being able to block so much damage, the ultimate as well for that protection for your AD carries, is just so powerful right now. And with items such as Redemption and Protector's Vow both getting a pretty nice buff this patch, with both of them getting the healing and shielding strength and both of them getting a HP buff, both these items combined together can be a great tool again to give your team more healing, more shielding, to give them the protection that they need to carry in team fights. And other items such as Frozen Heart, since Braum does a lot of magic damage, he can slow the attack speed of enemy champions, again another way to protect your team. Thornmail in there for the anti-heal. If you don't need anti-heal, you can go for something like, again, Zeke's Convergence for more slow, more crowd control, more peeling to try and protect your AD carry at all costs. As I mentioned, there isn't really a main rune choice for Braum. We don't have things like Guardian on Wild Rift, unfortunately, but Glacial Augment is still great if you can proc this on your passive or even your ultimate, the extra slow that you can get, and also the damage reduction that you can give to enemy champions means again that you can try and win them 2v2 duels in the bot lane or try and win team fights. Onto life for laning phase, you can poke with your first ability, slowing enemy champions, and then your AD carry can follow up with your auto attacks and you can heal both yourself and your AD carry during a lane phase. Second wind, most of the time you're going to be against poke champions, so this is great. However, you can go for bone plating. Perseverance, if you do get hit by any crowd control, you gain the extra tenacity and tankiness that you need. This can help you stay in the front line, stay protecting your team, use your shield, use your ultimate, and use your passive to try and get as many stuns off as possible. And a unique rune for Braum is actually Ingenious Hunter. This is going to reduce the cooldown, especially for Redemption and Protected Vow. Both of these items can proc multiple times during the team fight with Ingenious Hunter, which means again you get more shielding, more healing for your team to keep them alive. And that's going to do it for my top picks for Wild Rift patch 6.0a. Overall, patch 6.0 has definitely given Wild Rift a step in the right direction, especially with the durability patch, the changes to support items, and even some changes to some champions as well. However, I still feel like there are champions that maybe should be nerfed, like a Mumu, Victor, even Ambessa as well. If there are champions that you feel like maybe I missed, or champions that you're performing very well with in this patch, let me know down in the comments. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one.